The first bullet shattered the lighthouse window 6 inches above Clara Whitmore's head. She dropped behind the restoration table as antique glass sprayed across Logbook 18. The journal she had spent 6 weeks saving from saltwater, mold, and 80 years of neglect. Outside, a black SUV stopped sideways across the cliff road. Inside the lighthouse, a man Clara had seen only in faded surveillance photographs stepped through the broken doorway wearing a charcoal overcoat, dusted with snow. Dante Valenti looked at the shattered window, then at Clara. "Are you hurt?" She stared at him. Everyone in Grayhaven knew the Valenti name. Nobody expected its owner to appear during a blizzard asking polite questions. "I'm more concerned about the book you just covered in glass." Another shot struck the stone wall. Dante moved immediately. He crossed the room, caught Clara around the shoulders, and pulled her behind the lighthouse's central iron column as 2 of his men rushed in from outside. His hand stayed at her back for exactly 1 second before he removed it. "You can hate me after we're somewhere harder to shoot. I don't know you well enough to hate you." His eyes lowered to the journal on the table. Something changed in his face. "You opened Logbook 18. Clara forgot the gunfire. You know that number?" Dante's jaw tightened. Then one of his men shouted that another vehicle was coming up the cliff. Dante looked toward the stairs leading to the lantern room. "Take the book." Clara didn't move. "What is in it?" His answer came quietly. "The reason somebody is willing to kill you for reading it." 6 weeks earlier, Logbook 18 had looked like garbage. Grayhaven Historical Society had acquired 12 crates from the abandoned keeper's cottage after a storm tore through the roof. Most held maintenance reports, tide charts, supply receipts, and handwritten weather records dating back to the 1940s. Clara loved all of it. She believed history was mostly ordinary people leaving proof they had existed. A grocery list could matter. A coffee stain could matter. A margin note written during a storm could matter. Logbook 18 was different. The leather cover had warped almost in half. Seawater had fused dozens of pages together. Someone in the 1990s had apparently stored it beneath a leaking radiator. Clara spent her mornings humidifying pages 1 millimeter at a time, and her evenings documenting every recovered line. That was when she noticed the visitor. 19 December 1998. Male visitor, approximately 20, stayed 38 minutes, would not sign guest register. The 3rd of January 1999, same young man returned. Asked whether the lantern remained lit during funerals at sea. 23 December 1999. Visitor returned. Black coat. No gloves. Stood outside despite freezing rain. The entries continued. Every winter. Same visitor. Never named. Always alone. The observations were written by several different lighthouse volunteers, but beginning in 2001, one handwriting appeared more often than the others. Neat blue ink. Small letters. Careful punctuation. The anonymous volunteer seemed fascinated by him. Visitor arrived. 7:14 p.m. Declined tea. Accepted coffee after 23 minutes. 24 December 2002. Visitor stood beneath west window for 46 minutes. Appeared to be listening rather than looking. 22 December 2003. He laughed once tonight. I had forgotten he could. Clara had read that line 3 times. It was not the language of an official lighthouse log. It was the language of someone noticing another human being. She began searching the local archives. The lighthouse had no visitor photographs from those years, but the parking authority did. One image showed a young man beside a dark sedan. Even through snow, Clara recognized the eyes. Dante Valenti. At 24, he had already been the eldest son of Grayhaven's most feared crime family. By 30, He controlled shipping contracts, private security companies, casinos, warehouses, and several businesses nobody discussed openly. By 39, federal investigators had built cases around him and lost all of them. Yet, for 9 winters, he had climbed alone to an old lighthouse and refused to sign his name. Clara became obsessed with understanding why. Not with Dante himself, she told herself. With the record, the distinction became harder to defend when he appeared in person. The first time was 10 days before the shooting. Clara was alone in the keeper's cottage, eating terrible vending machine soup while snow gathered against the windows. Someone knocked. Dante Valenti stood outside holding a paper cup of coffee. He looked broader than he did in photographs, with dark hair beginning to silver slightly at the temples and an expression that seemed permanently controlled. His eyes moved past her toward the restoration room. "You're Clara Whitmore. That sounds less friendly when you say it like a background check." "I did a background check. At least you're efficient." Something almost resembling amusement touched his mouth. He held up the coffee. "May I come in?" "Is this the part where historians are supposed to be intimidated?" "No." "What part is it?" "The part where I ask you not to restore Logbook 18. Clara stared at him. Then she took the coffee from his hand. "You brought bribery. That cost $4. Historical institutions are underfunded." He actually smiled. It disappeared quickly. Inside, Dante stood several feet from the restoration table and did not touch anything. Clara noticed that. Powerful men often assumed everything belonged to them. He behaved as if the journal belonged to the dead. "Why shouldn't I restore it?" "Some histories cause more damage when recovered. That usually means somebody powerful dislikes what they contain." His gaze settled on her. "You have a habit of making uncomfortable conclusions quickly. I conserve paper for a living. Paper is basically people telling on themselves." He looked toward the window overlooking the sea. "Stop with that book." "No." He inhaled slowly. Most people in Grayhaven probably never told Dante Valenti no. Clara found the experience strangely disappointing. He didn't threaten her. He only nodded. "You close here at 8? 9. Leave before dark tomorrow." "Why?" "Storm. The weather service says the storm starts Thursday." "This one isn't weather." Then he left. The next afternoon, someone broke into the archive. Nothing valuable was stolen. Only Clara's photographs of Logbook 18 disappeared. She called Dante. He answered on the first ring. "You were right. Silence." Then, "Where are you?" That was how the routine began. Dante never asked to see the journal. He simply started appearing. Sometimes he arrived with coffee. Sometimes he sat in the corner while Clara worked. Sometimes he walked the lighthouse perimeter, speaking quietly into his phone. Their conversation stayed small. Clara learned Dante hated cinnamon but pretended not to because his late mother had baked with it constantly. Dante learned Clara named damaged documents before restoring them because she thought calling them items was depressing. He caught her referring to Logbook 18 as Walter. "That book is not a Walter. You don't know him. I knew people who wrote in him." That sounded indecent. Dante looked at her for a second, then laughed. The sound startled both of them. After that, Clara understood one of the old entries differently. He laughed once tonight. I had forgotten he could. The mystery deepened when Clara separated 2 pages that had been stuck together since 2004. Between them was a photograph. 2 boys stood near the lighthouse railing. One was Dante, younger and thinner. The other looked perhaps 17. They had the same eyes. On the back, someone had written, "Dante and Nico. Last good winter." When Dante saw the photograph, every trace of warmth vanished. "My brother." Clara placed it gently on acid-free paper. "I didn't know you had one." "Most people don't anymore." He sat across from her, For the first time since she had met him, his hands were not completely still. Nico died when he was 18. I'm sorry. Dante looked at the photograph. We came here when our father was unbearable. Nico said the lighthouse was proof you could stand in one place and still stop people from getting lost. Clara waited. He wanted out of the family. And you? I told him I would get him out. The room felt smaller. What happened? I failed. Dante stood. Conversation over. But at the door he stopped. Nico died on December 24th. Clara understood why every recorded visit happened near Christmas. The next mystery arrived 2 nights later. Beneath the photograph, Clara found a handwritten notation, partially concealed by water damage. NV met C at South Steps. Argument about manifests. D not told. NV Nico Valenti. Clara searched old port records and found cargo manifests from the same month. Several shipment numbers did not match official customs records. Someone had been using the Valenti shipping company to move weapons through Grayhaven harbor. The signature authorizing the containers belonged to Dante's father. A second signature belonged to Carlo Vescari, now Dante's most trusted advisor. Clara felt sick. Nico had discovered something, and according to the log, Dante had not been told. She called him. He arrived 20 minutes later. When she showed him the manifest, his face became unreadable. Carlo was 17 years older than me. My father trusted him. Did Nico? No. Did you? I trusted anyone my father trusted. I was 22 and stupid enough to think loyalty was inherited. Clara pointed to the journal. If Nico confronted Carlo here, there may be more. There isn't. You don't know that. I know, because the next page is missing. She looked down. He was right. A page had been cut cleanly from the binding. Dante had known. How? His eyes met hers. Because I removed it. Clara pushed back from the table. When? 20 years ago. What was on it? Dante said nothing. Herr Enger came fast. You let me spend 6 weeks restoring a book you already mutilated? I was protecting someone. Who? Myself. The answer landed harder than any excuse. Dante walked to the window. Nico wrote me a letter the night he died. He said he had proof my father's people were moving weapons to crews that trafficked teenagers through the port. Clara's stomach tightened. My father had rules. Drugs were business. Gambling was business. Extortion was business. But children were forbidden. That was your moral boundary. It became mine because it had been his. Dante's voice grew colder. Except Nico discovered my father was lying. The missing log page recorded the meeting. Nico had threatened to expose everything. Carlo told Dante's father. That night, Nico's car went through a guardrail. Everyone called it an accident. Dante never believed them. But you removed the page. I was 22. My mother was alive. My younger sister was 15. If authorities had raided the organization, Carlo would have known Nico talked. I thought keeping quiet protected what remained of my family. And then, my father died. I took control. You kept Carlo. Dante nodded. Because I needed him close. Clara stared at him. You spent 17 years waiting for proof. I spent 17 years becoming powerful enough that proof might matter. That sounds dangerously close to revenge. It was. And now? Dante looked at her. Now, somebody is shooting at historians. 3 days later, the bullet came through the lighthouse window. Dante's men moved Clara upstairs while his security team blocked the cliff road. She refused to leave Logbook 18 behind, carrying the journal against her chest as they climbed the spiral staircase. At the lantern room, wind screamed through old metal seams. Below them, headlights moved through snow. Dante stood beside the glass. Phone pressed to his ear. Carlo wants the journal, he said after hanging up. You're certain? He just offered me something no one else knows I want. What? His resignation. Clara frowned. That seems generous. It's an admission. Another vehicle turned away below. Dante's men had stopped the threat without firing. Clara noticed his relief. For all his reputation, Dante had ordered everyone repeatedly not to shoot unless necessary. She remembered his rule. Children were forbidden. What she had not understood was that he had expanded it. Civilians, too. You could kill Carlo, she said. Yes, you're not going to. His eyes remained on the snow. No. Why? Because Nico wanted the truth exposed. I spent 20 years pretending revenge and justice were the same thing. He looked at her. They aren't. That was the moment Clara became afraid of losing him. Not when he touched her. Not when he stood too close. Not during quiet coffee or unexpected laughter. It happened when he chose not to become the man everyone expected him to be. The remaining evidence came from Clara's profession. She examined the cut edge of the missing page under magnification and noticed paper fibers trapped beneath the binding adhesive. The page had been removed, then replaced briefly, then removed again. Someone else had handled it after Dante. She checked conservation notes from the lighthouse volunteers. One name appeared repeatedly. Margaret Hale. Volunteer coordinator. Blue ink. Small handwriting. Careful punctuation. Clara found Margaret living 30 miles inland, 81 years old, and sharp enough to criticize Clara's archival storage within 5 minutes of meeting her. When Clara mentioned Dante, Margaret became quiet. That sad boy still comes every winter. Dante, seated across the room, went completely still. You knew who I was? By your second visit. Why didn't you report my name? Margaret shrugged. You never broke anything. Clara showed her the missing page. Margaret looked at Dante. You cut it out. Yes, and I put it back. Dante stared at her. Margaret smiled faintly. I found it in the stove before you managed to burn it. Where is it now? Safe. She retrieved an envelope from a metal lockbox. The missing page contained the conversation between Nico and Carlo. Not every word. Enough. Nico had confronted Carlo about the trafficking shipments. Carlo had threatened him. More importantly, Margaret had written down the license plate of the vehicle that followed Nico away from the lighthouse. The plate belonged to one of Carlo's companies. Dante closed his eyes. 20 years of uncertainty ended on a single sheet of paper. He did not look relieved. Clara understood. Proof could not return his brother. Dante gave the evidence to federal investigators the next morning, but doing so exposed more than Carlo. The Valenti organization's legitimate businesses had been built partly with money from crimes committed under Dante's father and later protected under Dante's leadership. His lawyers warned him what cooperation would cost. Assets, contracts, political protection, possibly his freedom. Clara found him that evening at the lighthouse. One black coffee sat untouched beside him. His private ritual. 1 hour? She asked. He nodded. Every winter? Yes. Always alone? Until recently. Clara sat beside him. Their shoulders did not touch. Below them, the Atlantic looked almost black. I can't tell you what to do. I know. I also won't tell you that giving everything up magically fixes what happened. I know that too. She looked at his untouched coffee. What are you afraid of? Dante was silent long enough that she thought he would refuse. Then he said, becoming nobody. Clara turned toward him. My entire life, my name entered rooms before I did. People feared it, needed it, hated it. I told myself power was how I protected everyone. He rubbed his thumb along the paper cup. If I surrender it, I don't know what remains. Clara considered telling him that she knew what remained. The man who brought $4 coffee. The brother who had spent 20 years keeping a promise badly because he had never known how to let it go. The man who could order violence and increasingly chose restraint. But she didn't say any of that. Instead, she asked, "Did Nico love you because you were powerful?" Dante looked toward the sea. "No." "Then maybe start there." 2 days later, Dante dismantled his empire. He turned over financial ledgers, shipping records, shell company ownership, bribery evidence, and names his organization had protected for years. He sold controlling interests in the businesses that could survive legally, and placed portions of the proceeds into restitution funds for victims of the trafficking network Nico had discovered. Carlo Vescari was arrested at his home before sunrise. Dante accepted a plea agreement, tied to financial crimes and obstruction committed during his early years in leadership. 18 months in federal custody. The newspapers called it the fall of the Valenti Empire. Clara thought they misunderstood. Empires fell when someone lost control. Dante had released his deliberately. The night before he surrendered, he came to the archive. No bodyguards, no charcoal overcoat, just a dark sweater, and the expression of a man who had finally run out of places to hide. Clara was repairing the final page of Logbook 18. "You finished, Walter," he said. "You finally used his name. I'm facing prison tomorrow." Perspective. She smiled despite herself. He stood beside the table. Their hands almost touched. Neither moved closer. "I don't know what you expect from me," Clara said softly. "Nothing. That's not completely true." "No." He met her eyes. "I expect myself not to ask." That hurt more than she expected. "Why?" "Because waiting for someone with my history is not a small thing. You think you're protecting me by deciding for me." His expression shifted. "You're angry." "I'm extremely angry." "Good. Don't look pleased." "I've never seen you angry at me for leaving before." Clara stared at him. Then she laughed once, helplessly. Dante's smile was quiet. He touched 2 fingers to the edge of the restoration table, not to her hand, close enough that the restraint said more than touching would have. "I'll come back," he said. "I know." He looked surprised. Clara nodded toward the lighthouse journal. "Some people have patterns." 18 months passed slowly. And then, all at once, Clara continued working at Grayhaven Lighthouse. She published the recovered historical records, but withheld personal details unrelated to the criminal investigation. Margaret became an unofficial archive consultant and an official menace to anyone storing photographs incorrectly. Carlo was convicted. Several trafficking survivors received restitution from the dismantled Valenti holdings, and every winter, Clara volunteered for the holiday shifts. December 22nd. December 23rd. Christmas Eve. Again the following year. When Dante was released, he returned to Grayhaven quietly. The town expected spectacle. There was none. He rented a small house overlooking the harbor. He worked with the lawful shipping company he no longer owned, consulting on security and anti-trafficking systems. He drove himself. He bought his own groceries. He seemed almost entertained when nobody moved restaurant reservations for him anymore. On December 23rd, he climbed to the lighthouse. Snow had begun just before sunset. Clara was updating the visitor log when the door opened. Dante stood there holding 2 coffees. For several seconds, neither spoke. He looked leaner, calmer. There were new lines around his eyes. "You're late," Clara said. "Beh? 18 months. That seems unfair. I preserve records. Precision matters." He placed 1 coffee beside her. "No cinnamon. You remembered. I had limited recreational activities." She looked down so he wouldn't see her smile. They climbed to the lantern room together. Dante stood by the west window where he had stood every winter since he was 22. But something had changed. For the first time, he did not look like a man returning to a grave. He looked like someone visiting a memory. Later, while organizing newly donated volunteer files, Clara found an old scheduling binder. Most of it was ordinary. Names, dates, shift swaps. Then she noticed Margaret's handwriting. Beginning in 2001, Margaret had repeatedly assigned herself Christmas week. No surprise there. But someone else had covered those same winter evenings. A young graduate student who had volunteered at Grayhaven while working on her first maritime preservation project. Clara stared at the name, Clara Whitmore. She had forgotten. Not the lighthouse, not Margaret, but him. She had been 24, exhausted, insecure, and convinced nobody remembered the quiet, archivist working holiday shifts, because she had nowhere else she especially wanted to be. Then memory returned piece by piece. A silent man in a black coat, no gloves, standing beneath the west window. The first year, she had barely noticed him. The second, she had offered coffee. The third, she volunteered for Christmas Eve because she remembered how alone he had looked. And after that, she had quietly arranged her winter schedule around the strange visitor who never stayed more than an hour. Not because she knew his name, not because she wanted anything from him, because she had once looked across a lighthouse room and recognized loneliness. Clara carried the binder upstairs. Dante was watching the beam rotate over the dark water. She placed it in his hands. He read the schedule, then read it again. You? I didn't remember until now. His eyes lifted. You were the volunteer. Sometimes. Margaret wrote most of the notes. The coffee? Probably me. He looked back at the binder. Clara saw the understanding arrive slowly. You scheduled yourself here. She nodded. After the second year. Why? She could have made it dramatic. She could have told him some version of fate. Instead, she gave him the truth. You looked lonelier near Christmas. Dante said nothing. His breathing changed. That was all. A man who had survived violence, prison, betrayal, and the collapse of his family empire stood under an 80-year-old lighthouse lens, holding a volunteer schedule, as if it were the most dangerous thing he had ever touched. You didn't know who I was. No, you kept coming anyway. So did you. The lighthouse beam passed over them. Dante set the binder carefully on the table. Then, for the first time since Clara had known him, he reached for her without hesitation. Not possessively, not urgently. His hand simply opened between them. Clara looked at it, then placed hers inside. They stood there while the storm moved farther out to sea. Months later, Dante helped the Historical Society establish a permanent preservation fund in Nico's name, financed entirely from his remaining lawful earnings. Clara insisted the plaque be small. Dante complained. Margaret told them both to stop arguing near original documents. By the following winter, visitors came to the lighthouse to see the restored logs, though Logbook 18 remained protected behind conservation glass. One evening after closing, Clara found Dante downstairs reading the new visitor register. You aren't supposed to touch archive materials without gloves. This is a $12 notebook from the gift shop. Rules prevent chaos. He looked up. You sound exactly like Margaret. That is the cruelest thing you've ever said to me. He smiled. Outside, snow began falling over Grayhaven. Dante poured coffee into 2 paper cups. For years, his winter ritual had required 1 cup untouched beside him. Clara finally understood why. It had been Nico's. The first winter after leaving prison, Dante had still brought 2. 1 for the brother who never returned. 1 for himself. Tonight, he placed both cups on the table. Then he paused. Clara waited. Dante picked up the second cup and handed it to her. No speech, no declaration, no promise large enough to frighten either of them. Clara took it. Together, they climbed the spiral staircase, while the lighthouse beam swept across the Atlantic, turning darkness into something temporary. Below them, the restored journal remained closed behind glass. Its mystery was finished. Its meaning was not. Because buried inside 9 winters of anonymous observations was a truth neither of them had understood when it happened. Long before Clara knew Dante Valenti was dangerous, she had noticed he was lonely. Long before Dante knew Clara Whitmore's name, he had kept returning to the one place where someone always seemed to leave a light on for him. And on that winter night, with the sea moving below and snow soft against the glass, Dante finally stopped, standing beneath the west window like a man waiting for the dead. He stood beside Clara instead. When the lighthouse beam crossed the water again, 2 coffee cups rested on the sill. Neither one was untouched. The following spring, Clara added a new rule to the volunteer handbook. Nobody worked Christmas Eve alone, unless they wanted to. Dante found the sentence while helping her stack freshly printed copies in the keeper's cottage. He read it twice, then glanced at her. That seems unusually specific. Clara kept arranging the papers. Historical institutions learn from patterns. He nodded toward the handbook. And if someone wants to be alone, then we leave the light on anyway. Dante said nothing. A few minutes later, Clara noticed him carrying an extra chair upstairs to the lantern room. He placed it beside the west window, without explanation. By December, the chair was still there. So were the 2 coffee cups, though neither belonged to ghosts anymore. On Christmas Eve, Margaret arrived early with cookies. Nobody had requested, and criticism everyone expected. Visitors came and went until dusk, leaving wet footprints across the stone floor and handwritten notes in the new guest register. Near closing, a young man lingered by the doorway after his family had already gone outside. Clara saw the hesitation. Before she could speak, Dante crossed the room and held out a paper cup. Coffee? The young man accepted it. Dante did not ask why he was staying behind. He simply stood with him beneath the old lighthouse beam until the boy was ready to leave. Clara watched from the restoration table. Years ago, someone had done the same thing for Dante without knowing his name. Now he finally understood what to do with the kindness. Outside, the winter sea disappeared into darkness. Inside, the light kept turning.